We were just killing it. I had the best people ever assembled. And you walk down the hall, John Amita Sr., he's my art guy. He's my artist, my art director. Archie Goodwin, greatest of all time. Louise Simonson, Better Than Christmas. Larry Hama, it's like winning the lottery. And more. Sala Krupp and Budiansky and Carl Potts. And it's like, if you can't win with this team, fire the coach. It's good. These guys were tremendous, and they just did such a great job. Just amazing. It was a really good time. Marvel Comics would have gone out of business in 1977 if it wasn't for Star Wars, because Roy Thomas held his breath till he turned blue and finally convinced the company to buy or to get the license for Star Wars. And everybody was just shouting him down, Len and Marv saying, science fiction doesn't sell. But what I said is, show me a good one that doesn't sell, you know? And so anyway, that by itself sold so many copies. It kept Marvel afloat. Roy got me a year to turn it around. He bought me a year by getting us the Star Wars license. Got the good people, because everybody else was going out of business. And Warren out of business, so I could get Louise. DC cut 40% of the line on one day, so I could get Hama and O'Neill and Milgram. It was real tough time, but we were in a death spiral except that Star Wars was propping us up. Then we started getting guys like Miller, Byrne, you know, all these, you know, guys you never heard of for a long time, but there was just the who's who of creators there. And I was able to get all these great people, and they started making better books. Better books sold better, more stores opened, the stores were already there, were prospering. The more they prospered, the more books we sold, we were prospering. That's the way to win, to deserve it, you know? I ran into Terry Stewart at the Frankfurt Book Fair once, and he introduced himself, said he was the president of Marvel. It was nice to meet you. And we started talking about comics. He said, well, you're supposed to be the big comics guru. He says, I you know, won the lottery twice in a row with, you know, Spider-Man #1 and then 2 of those X books, each, you know, starting him over from #1. He says, what do I do now? I said, well, you've done all the easy stuff. I said, now you have to actually create something. I said, and you don't have the horses. He said, what do you mean? I said, oh, you know, you've driven away all of your primary creators, Stern, Goodwin, Hama, De Matteis, Michelini, like all of the guys who were doing the creating, driven away. I said, you got a bunch of flashy artists. That's it. He said, oh, yeah, well, I've got something in the works that, you know, we've already got something. It's called Marvel 2099. I said, just from the name, I can tell you everything about it. I said, that's pathetic. And I said, why can't you do something that's not derivative? He said, well, I have actually got Stan Lee working on this. I said, Stan's what, 80? You know, I don't think Stan's going to save you. You know, I mean, you know, he's great. He always was, and he was sharp as a tack up to the end. But he just wasn't going to work that hard anymore. I said, this is what will happen. It'll take off like a rocket, because all Marvel #1s in those days sold hundreds of thousands. And then it'll trickle down, and in a year it'll be dead. And that is exactly what happened. You know, I think that was the beginning of them struggling creatively. Now, they've had some good guys come through their doors since then, and some really amazingly talented people, but they seem to have lost, there's nobody steering the ship. They seem to have lost direction. They forgot what business they're in. It's entertainment, guys, first, entertainment, and everything else secondary. Can you do social justice? Of course. Stan did it all the time, but he did it right. It was in the midst of a story. It wasn't Stan talking to you. It was a character talking to you. It wasn't the company talking to you. It was, you know, some issue that would come up in the story. I love the fact that in the first issue of the Black Panther, race was never mentioned. It was in A Noble Hero. It was about the man, you know. All that lessons have been lost, and stuff I taught them, and stuff that Larry Hama and Archie Goodwin and Louise and other people taught them. They just, I don't know, forgot, threw it away. You know, I mean, Perlman bought the company. I was a bidder in that auction, but he outbid me. And he brought in all these marketing guys, and they came up with all this kamikaze marketing, you know, starting things over from #1. Every issue had an event or a costume change, or somebody gets married or somebody dies. It was all about events and not about stories anymore. And for a while, that trick always works for a while. Just like when the trading cards started doing all the chase cards and stuff, that works for a while. And then people either get tired of it, or they go back to the comic book store and try to sell the collectible special issue where somebody gets a new costume, and the guy says, I'll give you $0.25 for it, you know, because there are millions of them. And so a lot of people got disappointed and started dating girls instead. It was inevitable that they were going to crash and burn because it was a bubble, and everybody was riding it for a while. And I don't know, was it 1995, I guess, where the market crashed? Steve Deppie used to, in one of his magazines, he'd interview all the industry luminaries or get them to write a little article about what the future was going to hold that year. And everybody is just going to be better and better. We're booming. It's great. And I was the only guy who said, this is a bubble. It will burst. This industry is on a crash course. And in August, the bubble burst. And in about 3 months, we lost 80% of our volume. 80%. I mean, as an industry, not us, as an industry. And it's very sad. And they never actually really recovered from that. We were doing so well that the greedy financial weasels who owned us, 6 guys, owned Cadence Industries, including Marvel, which was a division of Cadence. They deliberately depressed the price of the stock, took it off the market. It just pillaged the shareholders because they could kind of, they hid Marvel's income because it was a division, not a subsidiary, not to get too technical. But you couldn't tell how well Marvel was doing, because they were using Marvel to lay off all the corporate expenses against all their fat cat salaries. And so they deliberately depressed the price of the stock to the point where they could raise enough money to buy it. And then 6 guys owned Cadence Industries, which was Marvel, Curtis Circulation, Perfect Pen and Pencil, Perfect Subscription Company, Vitamin Quota Stores, a bunch of loser companies. But they did succeed in selling Marvel to a company called New World Pictures, which changed its name to New World Entertainment. These guys had borrowed a whole big ton of junk bond money, paying huge interest on it, and they were buying up companies, and they kept picking the wrong ones. And Marvel was almost like break even at that point, and it was the only thing they had that was worth anything. I saw the rate they were going through their junk bond money, and I said, if within a year they have to sell something, or they're bankrupt, What do they got that's worth anything? Marvel. And so I put together a team, went to Chase North America. They agreed to be my financial advisor and provide the debt. Still had to get an equity partner. And we made an offer. We're told it will never be sold. 2 weeks later, they announced they're having an auction to sell it. So we placed a bid and made the auction was in 2 phases. One is to clean out the riffraff. They set an $80 million minimum. So we bid $80 million just to get into the second round. There were 9 entities in the second round. One by one, they fell away because they couldn't get management. And the reason I know that is because every one of them called me. And I said, sorry, I'm busy. We were the only bid. We put in the only bid. Perlman was not in the auction. We put in the only bid. We won. We had to go and sign documents, and we had to, we were thrilled. For 2 weeks, we thought we owned Marvel, and we're working on our plans and stuff. And then at 6 in the morning one day, my financial guy calls me up, and he says, have you read the journal? It's 6 in the morning, no, Winston, I haven't read the journal, And he said, Perlman bought Marvel. I said, what? How can that be? Well, he was an insider at the selling company. And if you own 20% of a selling company, you can't bid. But if you get an arm's length bid, then you can beat it and buy it. And so we were a stalking horse. We were just set up. He's a guy, he was thrilled that somebody put in a bid. And so we never had a chance to reply. There's usually a process called ratcheting when there's 2 contenders where they keep getting you to try to outbid the other ones. We could have gone up to about 115 million. But he would have beaten that. He was going to do it anyway, So he had it. His marketing people, they Spider-Man #1, X-Men #1, all that. Yeah, they made some money for a while. And he made a fortune because he was churning the stock. His stock would fall, and he'd buy a bunch of it up. And then he'd announce, we're buying a trading card company. Stock shoots up, he sells. It's called churning. And he kept doing that and doing it. He made hundreds of millions of dollars that way. But eventually he ran out of tricks. And they were just not selling it. It was really going down. And also by that time, they had done what DC had done. They got a lot of fat cat salaries. They were paying their editors $500,000 a year and stuff like that. It's just ridiculous. They were on the verge of bankruptcy, and if they went bankrupt, Carl Icahn and the bondholders would take over. And I got a call from Bill Bevins, who was the CEO of Perlin's holding company. And he said, his first words to me after hello was, can you fix this? And I said, yes, I can fix it. He said, come to my office. So I went up on just off of Madison Avenue someplace in the 60s. And I went to his office. And that day we made a deal. We worked out a whole deal. And I told him what I'd need, and he said he would get it. He said, it's going to take me 3 weeks. Can you wait? I said, yeah, I can wait, sure. 2 weeks later, Marvel went bankrupt. He couldn't hold it off. I mean, they were trying everything they could to hold off the bankruptcy, but Icon's lawyers forced it. And so that was the end of that last try. I did try to buy it out of bankruptcy, but too many contingent liabilities, couldn't do it.
I met with Fred Pierce when I was in New York. I was supposed to interview Paul Levitz. Paul had to cancel for other reasons, and I was like, well, I'm here. And so Fred was kind enough to meet with me, and it was just crazy to be in that space, not knowing the full history of Valiant. I had just seen the books for forever.
Well, Fred was one of the financial weasels, so, you've got to take some of what he says with a grain of salt.
Sure.
I mean, when I wouldn't sign their draconian contracts, they convened the board, but I was CEO and I had a lot of stock, and they didn't have enough votes to fire me. So what they did is they put Fred, who worked for them, Triumph Capital, they had enough votes to put a member on the board, so they put Fred on the board, and then they had enough votes to fire me. And I remember what he said. He said, Jim, it's just business. That's what he said. That was his attitude. Well, it isn't just business, Fred. I built this. But anyway, I mean, like I started Defiant, and I called it Defiant, and just don't quit.
You don't start a thing at 13 and do it your whole life to not say that you're not a comics man.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people, when somebody tells their side of the story and the people tell them, they tend to split the difference. That's automatically giving a 50% win to the bad guy. If someone is actually all right and the lying weasels are all wrong, and you split the difference, you're giving a victory to the lying weasels. I try to tell things as accurately as I can. If you want to get into all the mistakes I made and the things I did wrong, we could spend a week on that too. But nothing in self-interest, never for selfish reasons. I didn't steal their money. I didn't sleep with their wife. I didn't kill their dog. I didn't do anything. I was just trying to do my job, make good comics. And if somebody says, well, what about this guy? Fine, you give me the name. I'll tell you exactly what part of the problem they were, how I tried to fix it, and then if it couldn't be fixed, either they left or I fired them. In 10 years, roughly 10 years, I think I fired only 5 or 6 people who richly deserved it. And more people died than I fired, and I did not kill them.
You're saying that on camera just as a...
I don't care.
No, you're making sure we all know. I didn't kill them. No wink. All right.
No wink at all. Why? Because I'm accused of the murder of Gene Day. Doug Mensch and Dave Sim have, dined out on that for a long time. This totally bogus story about how I worked him to death, and the best one is that we were doing an inking jam because the book was late, so I made him fly in from Canada, or wherever he lived in Canada, and stay up all night, and there was no heat, and it was freezing, and there was no place to take a nap or anything like that. A, why would I fly an inker in from Canada when I had dozens and dozens of inkers right there in New York? B, we didn't do that many jams. C, our offices were in this big, giant, office building. They don't turn the heat off at night in a big, giant office building. When somebody brought up all this stuff in my blog, and a guy who was an HVAC expert wrote in a comment saying, "No, you're wrong. They would never turn off all the heat." And I said, besides, we had our own heat. We had our own controls. We had our own. We could set the temperature anything where we wanted. So we put them up in good hotels. We fed them. We made everybody as comfortable as possible. So all that stuff that they said is bogus. And then Dan Day, Gene's brother, wrote into my blog, and he just debunked the whole thing. He said Gene was sick, and Jim and Marvel had nothing to do with it. And he came to the end, but it was nothing about Marvel. And the reason he worked so much is because he loved it. He'd get up in the morning, he'd work late into the night because he loved what he was doing. And you know, it was irrepressible that way. You know, it wasn't because I made him do it.